Okay, welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. Dr. Lopkin, obviously the story of the week is George H. Bush.
His passing, it's not just the loss of a president, it's actually the end of an era. He was the last
Cold Warrior.
Well, more than just the last Cold Warrior. He was the last president that had any real military experience. He was the last president that really served his country, not just as a soldier, but in various positions before running for office. So, like Hillary.
Yes, I agree 100%. I agree 100% with that, Dr. Lopkin. And let me just add, I thought sometimes you can be the beneficiary of something, of a period of time, and sometimes you can be the victim of something as a period of time. I thought George H.W. Bush was an excellent president. He led, global coalitions with the first Gulf War, helped on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I think he was just a victim of Republican fatigue. If you remember, it was the early 90s, and there was like the mildest of recessions. I mean, this recession was, historically almost nothing. But you had like Bono. It was just the Friends kind of psychology, the Generation X coming into their own, and also Mary Madeline, I believe her name is. A horrible campaign he ran. He really deserved a second term. What do you think?
He really did. And if you take a look, if you remember, he really was a victim of the media, because the media constantly portrayed him as a wimp. And they used that word over and over again. This was a man who was one of the youngest fighter pilots ever to serve in World War II. He was director of the CIA. This was not a wimp. This is a guy who
okay. Just being a fighter pilot. End of story. You can wear a dress and jump in the cockpit of a Corsair. Guess what? You're not a wimp.
Exactly.
That is almost like a suicide mission. That's brutal. Yes.
So, he had all of this experience, all of this. And even now, he's still teaching lessons, because there's been a number of commentators who've mentioned this. There was no love lost after the current campaign between the Bush and Trump families.
Zero, yes.
Unlike John McCain, the Bush family reached out to the Trumps and said, yes, of course we would want you at the funeral, at the services. You're welcome to come, please. As opposed to what happened with John McCain, where they were just bitter to the end.
Well, John McCain, though, is, again, I know you had something to do with his campaign. I liked him too in 2000. I'm sorry, and it's not rocket science. He just became a bitter old man.
He did.
Not just about Trump. In interviews, when people asked him questions, he would bark at them. He was just not, in the end, he was not a nice person. Nothing to do with Trump. He was just not a nice guy.
No, and George H.W. Bush is the antithesis of that. Even towards the end, he reached out to people. In fact, one of my business partners, George H.W. Bush, crashed his son's wedding.
Really?
He had his wedding up in Maine, and it was right on the water. Well, Bush had been sailing. As he's coming close, they have to close off the waterfront. Secret Service comes out, closes everything up, almost, interrupting the wedding. When George H.W. Bush realized what had happened, he brought the boat in, came to the wedding, apologized for the Secret Service interfering.
Yeah, no, he was a gentleman. I think, again, back to the campaign, he got screwed by Ross Perot. He did run a bad campaign. He was not great in the debates. And also, he was a victim, and you may not remember this, of an October surprise. I was a big fan of his. He was gaining on Clinton Gore. He was gaining, and then they had the October surprise, and it had to do with the Iran-Contra, I believe. It was basically a nothing burger, but anytime you have to stop being on the offensive and go on the defensive, it usually doesn't lead to any good.
Right. And Bush often said himself, he did not like campaigning. He thought campaigning was something you should do for about 6 weeks before an election and then get back to the business of governing. And he really was the last president to do that. Clinton kept on the road. Obama was the campaigner in chief. He barely governed. He did well,
but also with Clinton, he tapped into the MTV. I mean, it's really kind of nostalgic. The early '90s. It's like,
yes,
the Friends, the MTV. You were boxers or briefs, and got a lot of play. I think also, I really do believe that if it wasn't for H. Ross Perot, I believe Bush would have won. I mean, even though he's a nutcase, he got like 20% of the vote.
Yeah, Perot was a spoiler, with no doubt.
Yes, I think actually the world would have been better if he got a second term. The more I think about Clinton in retrospect, is he was the beneficiary of the internet boom, of Reagan, Bush, and he really didn't, and also a Congress, a Republican Congress that kept him in check. I don't see him as a great president. I think George H. was a better president. What do you think?
George H. Bush was a much better president than Clinton was.
And don't you think the whole Clinton shtick, though, in the end is getting a little... No, I'm not talking about his wife.
Right.
I voted for him. But in the end, was he really all that good?
No, I voted for Bill Clinton also. And it's one of those things. At the time, I didn't think too much of George Bush's presidency. It's in retrospect that you realize, he did all of these things, didn't get too much credit for it, but he really was an excellent president. By the same token, Clinton at the time, he's doing a great job. And then as time goes on, it's like, well, it wasn't that great after all.
It's really kind of interesting. It's really funny. Clinton came out, even in spite of the impeachment, which I did not believe in.
Right.
He had like 70% approval rating when he left office. He was still a very popular. I mean, it was really interesting because let's say that was, 98, I believe he left. No, 99, right? Yeah,
99.
Yeah.
But 2000 was the election, yeah.
Yeah, the economy was so good that I remember I saw a show, and this is in Connecticut. Some reporter for Channel 30 was at a jobs fair, and he said, if you're unemployed in Connecticut, you better check the spelling on your resume. And I think he left. The economy was smoking, and back then people cared more about the economy than they do now. And I think he was the last time when the economy was smoking until now. Do you agree with that?
Yes, it really
like almost
was.
20 years of a disaster, really.
And I mean, one of the things that set Bush apart from the folks who have been in office since then is he really didn't care about his legacy. He thought history would take care of that. Whatever it would be. He just wanted to get his job done. In fact, there was a story told this morning. The federal government actually started planning for these state funerals a number of years ago. And for George H.W., it was planned back in 2011, 2012. And when they went through all of the arrangements with him, they told him how, he was going to be at the Capitol and people, could come to view the body. He actually asked, do you really think anybody's going to come?
God, I did hear that he, even though he was a real gentleman, he was perplexed and bothered by the fact that he lost to Clinton Gore, two like rank amateurs. He was upset because of all the great things he did, managing the decline or the ending of the Cold War, doing all these things, and he left because really the MTV, Arsenio Hall, the MTV generation, that's why he lost.
Oh, absolutely.
Bad press. So you said it at the beginning. I'm calling it the MTV.
Remember that even though he felt bad about that, he never held it against Bill Clinton. Remember,
no, they were friends.
Yeah, he and Bill became good friends and actually went doing charity work all over the world. I mean, could you see Obama doing that with anybody who followed him, but especially Trump?
I think actually it's funny because even though he's much, much, much younger, I see Obama kind of, again, much younger, becoming a little bit like McCain. He's just getting to be even though he's only like 50 something, he's just an angry guy.
Yeah, because he went into this. Remember, he never had the experiences that Bush did.
No.
He went into it very inexperienced and spent the last, I would say, 6 months of his presidency trying to put together a legacy. That was what was important to him. And when he campaigned for Hillary Clinton, he said, if you vote against Clinton, it's a vote against my legacy. These were his words. And that was really one of the things that set George H.W. apart, was that he didn't care what his legacy was. I
think you have a really good point,
He was doing the best he could and let history judge.
And you're right. But when you look at Obama, one of the sad things about his presidency, it was all an illusion. It was all about imagery. There's very little substance. He passed things like Obamacare. He wasn't really even that directly involved in it. Bin Laden, yes, okay, it was a good thing, but he wasn't, sitting behind, the Joint Chiefs, monitoring. He was kind of a part-time president who was great on camera. What do you think about that, Lopkin?
That's actually a very good description. I mean, we've said he was the campaigner in chief, and that was basically it. He just kept, cheerleading and going out and rallying the troops. But when it came to actually doing things and getting done what the country needed to be done, he was all flash and no substance, where George H.W. suffered from the opposite. He was all substance, and the lack of flash actually cost him his second term.
And it's sad because he was the beginning of the flash generation, don't you think?
Yes.
Dr. Lopkin, great edition of Carnivore Bites. We'll do it again.
Absolutely. See you then.
You've been listening to Carnivore Radio's podcast. You can catch us here every week. Carnivore Radio is part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can listen to the podcast at blogtalkradio.com/Xvadio. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can listen to us live every Friday at 4 o'clock on WESU 88.1 Middletown, Connecticut. You can also catch us online at WESUFM.org. We look forward to hearing from you, and see you next week.